Hi everyone, my name is Frede and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in the first half of September. Now I've read 4 books so far and I feel like I've got quite a lot to say about all of them, so I thought I would rather do a mid-month wrap-up. So the first book that I finished was a book that I started in August, and it's actually a collection of poems. So it's the collected poems by Audre Lorde, which I got from the library, which is why it looks like this. But yeah, so I read the entire everything poetry that Audre Lorde has ever written, and I really like this. So there were some poems that I could connect with more than others, and I feel like the later in her life the publication of the poems went, the less I personally could connect to it. And basically I guess my favourite collections of these are The First Cities, A Land Where Other People Live, and New York Head Shop and Museum. Yeah, because later, the later you get in her life, basically, the less I understood what she was actually writing about, because I felt like a lot of her later poems were just things that happened in her life and then she wrote a poem about it, but it was still very particular about the situation that she was in. Whereas I felt like with the earlier poems, they were more general, kind of more accessible. I really loved her poetry in general. I think objectively everything is great, but I obviously couldn't connect to everything the same, but I did really connect to most of the poems in the collections that I just mentioned. If anyone's interested in picking up Audre Lorde's poetry, I would actually really recommend starting with the first poetry collection, which is The First Cities. That was probably my favourite. The second book that I finished, I listened to an audiobook, and it was a reread. I read this last year and didn't really get it, and still I'm not sure if I've really got it. But yeah, so I reread it this year with an audiobook, and that is The Sellout by Paul Beatty. This won the Man Booker Prize last year, and I heard about it on BookTube. It's basically a kind of satire where you have an African American man who tries to reinstate segregation and slavery in his small town. The plot is really bizarre, but basically the thing is a commentary on race relations in America and racism in America. And I feel like this year reading it, or listening to it, first of all I think listening to it was a good idea, because reading it, the sentences are really complicated sometimes and he uses words where you're like, what the fuck? So I feel like having someone read it to me a bit more slowly than I read at my own pace, it was a bit easier for me to follow along in general. And yeah, generally I think in the past year I've just learned more about the history of America and just racist things there, so that's why there was more that I understood. But I still think the reason I actually finished this was because I'm stubborn and I don't like not finishing books. But I think that if you're European and white, it's really hard to understand what he's talking about in this book, because there's so many references to, especially things that are very particular about American culture, I think, because there are so many things that I didn't pick up on. I read the Goodreads reviews, and apparently even the cover, this, I don't know what you call this, I googled it and I forgot it, this person, apparently even that has something racist. I forgot what it's called, something with jockey, I think. I don't remember, but those are things that I don't pick up on because I've never seen that before. I was just thinking, okay, that's a person with a lantern. So I think this is what it makes very difficult as a non-American to read this book. I still think that what I understood was really good. So what I mostly got out of this is a criticism of saying, oh, that's problematic, but not saying what exactly is the problem, and just, throwing the word problematic around all the time. Criticizing, it's hard to say, but criticizing someone saying something racist, but just criticizing them saying it, but not the fact that this person is racist, if you get what I mean. I don't know, it's harder to describe it because I'm not sure if I got it myself, so yeah. There were also a lot of commentaries about white guilt in there. Yeah, just generally I think a lot of commentaries on the way that racism is in America, and the way that Americans are very uncomfortable with it and don't really talk about it, and that, yeah, so that's kind of all I can really say, because it's a really difficult book and I'm not sure if I would recommend it. I mean, if you're American, you will probably get more than I did, but I think it's difficult if you don't understand the frame of reference, which For the most part I didn't. The third book that I read is a book that I have to read for uni. I uploaded a video of my reading list for the upcoming semester a couple of days ago actually. I'm going to leave a video down below in case you're interested what I have to read. But I read The Shawl by Cynthia Ozick, and it's a very, very short book, but it's really heavy and really difficult to read. So this book is about Rosa, who is a survivor of the Holocaust, and the book starts out with a chapter of her and two other people in her family being like forced to walk towards a concentration camp. And then the second part, which is also more actually of the book, is like 30 years later, where she's in America, and you see her life and how the Holocaust and that experience really had a big effect and a terrible effect on her life. And this was really, really hard to read. What I think this book did amazingly though, and this is why I would recommend it to everyone basically, although it's really hard to read, is that when you have big historical events or even like political events now, you always have these big numbers, you know, like so and so many thousand people were killed today, and you have like mass graves where you have like 1,500 people are buried here. Those big numbers and those like big years and all that. And I think what this book does so well is showing how it's individuals who are affected by this, because it's so easy to forget that it's actual people, you know, individuals. And this is what this book does so well, showing how one individual had to go through this and how this affected her. So yeah, I think this was absolutely brilliant. It was terrible, like terrible just because it really happened. Like this person could be real, that's what makes it terrible, but it's because of that, it's a really, really good book. And yeah, I would just really highly recommend it because it's really important. The last book that I finished was Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. I am currently in the process of rereading all the Harry Potter books, so in case you just new to my channel, I've read all the other books before this. So far I've read, I think, the first 2 or 3 last year, and then now I'm finished the 6th one. And I think from all the books that I've reread so far, this is my favourite. I really, really like this book. I like the pacing. Sometimes it was a bit confusing because she was like, the next 2 weeks nothing happened. I'm like, okay. But I much preferred the pacing of this to the pacing of the 5th book, which I thought was a bit slow. I really like the pacing, I like what happened, and I also really enjoyed these memories that Harry and Dumbledore visit. And what I thought was brilliant with that was that after each of those memory visits, Dumbledore says to Harry, okay, those are the important things that we just learned. And I think that this was a very clever way of J.K. Rowling to ensure that her readers are on the same page as Harry, because I hate it when you read a book and you're supposed to identify with the protagonist and they're supposed to be a reliable protagonist and they know more than you. I hate that. And because Harry Potter has such a huge range of age of readers, I think this was brilliant, because I wouldn't have picked up on some of these things if I had read this at like 13 or something. So I think this was done really, really well. I really loved this book. I cried at the end. Like, I was actually planning on going to bed early that evening. I was like, okay, just one more chapter, and then I was like, oh shit, I might as well finish it now. And then I finished it and I was in tears. It was terrible. But yeah, I really love this. There's just one thing that pissed me off so much, and that is when Harry visits Ron's family over Christmas and Lupin is there as well. And Harry has a conversation with Lupin about Lupin living with werewolves. And at some point, I know that J.K. Rowling said that she wrote the werewolves in the society the way that she did because she kind of wanted it to be sort of an allegory of like HIV and the way that people who are HIV positive have a lot of stigma kind of on them, which society just puts on them. And like, if you just have a 3rd book, I would say, okay, it's still, I don't know, maybe a bit questionable, but okay, fair enough. But in this book, as I said, when Harry has a conversation with Lupin over Christmas, and Lupin talks about how he's currently living with werewolves to try and convince them to like join their side and not to fight with Voldemort. And then he talks about Greyback, who's basically, I think, the only werewolf that's really named. And he talks about Greyback and he's like, yeah, that's the werewolf who also bit me, and he thinks that it's the best thing to do to like infect people when they're like really young. And I was just sitting there like, so what I'm going to say is a lot of interpretation, but this was my reading of it, and it just made me really, really angry. So the only werewolves you really know who have names are Lupin, Greyback, and then, I mean, later Bill is attacked, so those are 3 men. And then from what Lupin told Harry, I mean, there was no gender mentioned, but you could imagine this troop of werewolves and all of them are men and they live in the woods and bite people. So I was just thinking, what the fuck are you doing? Because if you say that being werewolf is kind of supposed to be like being HIV positive, and you only have men who you know are werewolves, like, it just made me think of this really stupid and old-fashioned idea that only gay men can be HIV positive, or that gay men equals HIV positive, and that, so that. And then the fact that Greyback says that he purposefully infects children, and I was just sitting there like, what the fuck? Are you portraying gay people to be like pedophiles and predators and purposely like infecting people with HIV? Like, what the fuck are you doing? And like, I don't think this was meant to be this way. Like, I don't think, you know, that J.K. Rowling is secretly a huge homophobe and that she, like, you know, and that was what she was trying to say. And I probably wouldn't even have thought this if she hadn't said that she'd written Lupin the way she did, or basically Lupin, the werewolves in the society, in order to kind of have this allegory with HIV. So, yeah, you know, it was probably well intended, but she just didn't think it through, and it just made me so angry. And like, I mean, generally the thing is like, Lupin is the only one who's really kind of a social outcast. All of the other werewolves that we learn of are kind of just like, I mean, they're kind of evil, you know? It's like, ah, so yeah, that made me really angry. I'm getting a bit angry again just talking about this. But yeah, as I said, this was just a way of interpreting it, and I wouldn't have interpreted it like that if there hadn't been the stupid quote by her about, like, I don't remember exactly what she said, but I know that she said that she wrote it like this so that she could have kind of a Wizarding World allegory of people with HIV. And I really didn't like the way that, if you think it through, you have it in this book. Like, yeah. But apart from that, I love this so much. So much. It was such a good book. And I'm probably going to take my time until I start the 7th. But yeah, so this was probably my favourite so far. And the fact that this book is so good makes me even more angry about the film, because the 6th film is the worst Harry Potter film there is. It just makes no sense if you haven't read the book, and I hate it. So those were the books that I read in the first half of September, and I did have quite a lot to say about these books, so I'm glad I made the decision to do this mid-month wrap-up, because otherwise the end of the month wrap-up would have been like an hour long or something, and we don't want that. And that was basically it for today, so I hope you're all doing well. I would like to hear what you read in the first half of September, if there's any book that you have a lot of strong feelings about, like I did with most of these things that I read. And thank you very much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye!